This is Sadie Lister. I'm with the Native American Producer Success Project. My clan is Tanistani Nishle Tupahabashichin, Tsinajini Dashanale Do Twidijini Dashiche, and I reside at Indian Wells, Arizona. We want to thank everyone for joining and also to let you know some webinar logistics. All our webinars will be recorded, such as tonight, and it will be posted on NAPS and Southwest Climate Hub websites, YouTube, and Facebook. During the presentation, you may enter your question in the Q&A box or in the chat box. After the presentation, we will have a Q&A session. At that time, you can also raise your hand to ask a question. The Drought Management webinar series is a collaborative effort with our guest speakers, Drought Learning Network, Native American Producer Success Project, and the Southwest Climate Hub. This is information in regards to our project. The Native American Producer Success Project is a collaborative effort between Developing Innovations and Navajo Education Incorporated, New Mexico Cooperative Extension, and Diné College Land Grants Office. The goal of the NAPS project is to increase the profitability and long-term sustainability of Navajo farmers and ranchers by providing information about improving ranch and farm operations, increasing farmer-rancher access to available programs and technical assistance provided by USDA, BIA, Navajo Nation, New Mexico Cooperative Extension, Diné College Land Grant Office, and others. We are also strengthening the organizational capacity of the Navajo Farmer and Rancher Congress to address the current and future needs of Navajo farmers and ranchers. We also facilitate Navajo farmer and rancher use of USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service, Farm Service Agency, and Risk Management Agency programs. NAMPS is funded by USDA's Office of Partnership and Public Engagement, Outreach and Assistance for Socially Disadvantaged Farmers and Ranchers, and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers program.
Yeah, today I'm Helena Deswood. I'm the tribal coordinator with the Southwest Climate Hub. So USDA Climate Hubs are a unique network of 10 regional teams located across the US. The Climate Hubs link USDA research and program agencies to deliver regionally relevant, timely, and science-based tools and information to agricultural producers and professionals. The Drought Learning Network links climate service providers with resource managers to increase landscape and community resilience in current and future drought. I'll turn it back over to Sadie to introduce our speakers tonight.
Okay. Tonight, our presentation is going to be about precipitation variability throughout the Navajo Nation by Crystal Tulley-Cordova, who works with the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources. And our second presentation will be about Drought Severity Evaluation Tool by Nikki, University of Arizona. Crystal Tulley-Cordova, PhD, MWR, is a principal hydrologist for the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources, Water Management Branch. She is an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation. She received a doctoral degree in geology and interdisciplinary graduate certificate in sustainability from the University of Utah. She has also received a Master of Water Resources in Hydroscience and a Bachelor of Science in Earth and Planetary Science from the University of New Mexico. She has worked collaboratively with Navajo Nation partners on water-related research since 2013. Her research interests include learning more about Navajo Nation water budget, namely the interactions of precipitation, surface and groundwaters, and nexus with Navajo communities. Her past research consisted of 3 projects conducted in collaboration with the Navajo Nation Water Management Branch, Navajo Tribal Utility Authority, and Navajo Environmental Protection Agency. They are entitled Navajo Nation USA Precipitation Variability from 2002 to 2015. Number 2, Stable Isotopes in Precipitation and Associated Waters recording the North American monsoon in Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. And number three, groundwater sustainability and susceptibility to modern contamination in Fort Defiance, Arizona. Crystal has a passion for working with tribal communities. She realizes the importance to help tribal nations dependent on water resources understand the effects of hydroclimate changes on their tribal homelands. Crystal hopes the knowledge and experience she's gained over the years will help her assist Navajo communities to use their current knowledge about water to build sustainable water projects, seek funding for water related research, and protect and manage water resources across the Navajo Nation. Nikki Tulley is a member of the Navajo Nation. She is a third year PhD student in the Department of Environmental Science with a concentration in hydroscience at University of Arizona. Her research focuses on ensuring that people living in indigenous communities have access to clean drinking water to sustain their way of life in ever-changing environment through sustainable practices and water policies and management. She is an Alfred P. Sloan 2018-2021 Scholar, American Indian Graduate Center Fellow, and American Indian Science and Engineering Society Sequoia Fellow. Nikki received her Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Science and a Master of Science degree in Water Resources from the University of New Mexico. Holds a deep passion for mentoring students living in underserved, underrepresented Native American and rural communities through STEM education. Her continuously work she continuously works to support the enhancement of STEM understanding among Native American communities and students. So, thank you, both of you, for joining us this evening. We really are looking forward to your presentations, and I will go ahead and give the floor to Crystal.
Yeah, Sadie. She Crystal Tulley-Cordova Yanishia Twitch eating the Schlant cat that's nothing but just chin hash on head so I dash a tray to he cleaning it dash anale best dog collision dash gauge dot what like I didn't nasha. Good evening. Sorry, it's been a long day. On the Navajo Nation, this is much what our water cycle looks like, and we have a great connection to water, to all aspects of water, everything from precipitation to the streams running in our ephemeral streams that run intermittently throughout the year, as well as our perennial streams that run year round. We rely on these water sources to be able to support the ecosystem that we are reliant upon, but also to support our vitality, especially with groundwater. And then as the San Juan lateral and Cutera lateral come online, we have a greater dependence on surface water that provides sustainability for our Navajo communities. I work for the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources, and the department, if you may be unaware, is made up of these entities. The Technical Constructions and Operations Branch primarily works with the water code, so any permitting that is done for water wells or any kind of wells for that matter is done through the water code. There is also irrigation that is covered under this entity, as well as impoundment and windmills. And then there's the administration branch. And under the administration branch are all those who help our director, Jason John, in his capacity of what he does for the Navajo Nation for water resources. We also have the safety of dams that take care of the dams that are, Ganado Lake, many farms, Asai, Wheatville, Saley, all of those lakes are taken care of by Mr. Paul Long. And then the branch that I work for is the water management branch. We do a lot of different things. We take care of mapping and archives related to water related work. This branch provides a lot of information for water rights related work. We also do watershed studies. This is a branch that also does water monitoring and inventory of water precipitation throughout the Navajo Nation. The main goals of this branch is to protect and manage the water resources of the Navajo Nation through development. And it's really key that we have this understanding to be able to support the efforts of the water resources in general. So the water monitoring and inventory program that's under the water management branch does a lot of different things. They monitor flows, surface flows and perennial and ephemeral streams. They also have evaluated groundwater at various levels, and then precipitation at 85 precipitation sites currently, and then 8 snow course sites and climate databases that have collected data throughout the years. So why is it important that we evaluate these aspects of precipitation? Changes in precipitation can impact groundwater recharge, as well as spring and lake and stream recharge. The frequency of dust migration is also impacted by changes in precipitation, as well as the flow in ephemeral and perennial streams. Plant and animal populations can also change with continued climate change impacts. There have been reports that have evaluated this aspect, particularly the mule deer populations and their migrations northward, as well as the populations of feral horses throughout the Navajo Nation. If you want more information about that, you can go to the Navajo Nation Fish and Wildlife site to be able to see that information. The occurrences of wildfires is also related to changes in precipitation. And then the change in vegetative cover, possible alterations in species compositions. And the previous work that has been done to be able to evaluate precipitation was done by Crimmins et al. Back in 2013. And it was really just, averaging out the precipitation seen across the area. But if you're from the communities that are in the southwestern portion of the Navajo Nation, that place looks a lot different than salient wheat fields. The vegetation can be able to tell you, how much precipitation comes to a region because of the species types that are there. And for me, this was, already something that was kind of like an outlier or a flag that stood up to me, knowing and growing up on the Navajo Nation that when you drive from north to south or east to west, that there is more changes and variability than what this graph shows. That led me to further investigate water across the Navajo Nation. And the hydrometeorological network was set up in the 1950s and 60s and had grown as far to have 200 precipitation sites where precipitation values were evaluated on a month-to-month basis to be able to evaluate the amount that has fallen in that area. And this information is very important because we don't have automated services to evaluate this for the most part. There are a couple of areas in the Cheska Mountains at Whiskey Creek and Beaver Springs that can evaluate changes in precipitation as well as temperature. But the main reason why this doesn't exist throughout the Navajo Nation are related to energy capacities. We know that many people on the Navajo Nation still do not have electricity as well as running water. And so those are, the limited energy capacity is one aspect that has limited automated systems of this. There are tipping buckets that are located throughout the Navajo Nation, as well as stream gauge and snow course survey sites, and we have that data to be able to be shared today. The data that I'll be sharing today will be evaluating precipitation sites throughout the Navajo Nation, not the 200 that I mentioned that we once had, but 90 precipitation sites. And this is what our precipitation collectors look like. The work that I did was evaluating the silver color precipitation cans and changes in inches in those precipitation collected. The one that has a camouflage color are work that I did related to stable isotopic collections to evaluate precipitation changes and its relationship to groundwater, as well as lakes, springs, and streams. That work is in prep today and should be out in a couple of months. But today I'll just be talking about the changes in precipitation. From the vegetation, as I previously described, you can tell that, for example, the picture on the far right is bluff. And when you compare that to the picture that is labeled D at the bottom in the middle, there's a lot of differences in precipitation where when you're in the mountainous areas, there's more precipitation that may come your way, whereas the lower areas don't have that. So when I work with the Navajo Nation and wanted to be able to select a project, this is what I saw. And one of the things that's difficult to be able to see with this type of imagery is that it's really hard to see precipitation patterns and trends that might be noticed. So the work that I did was to be able to evaluate these research questions. Are there different hydroclimatic regions on the Navajo Nation? Is there a bimodal precipitation regime? Basically meaning, does it rain a couple of times out of the year during a specific season? And what are the seasonal precipitation patterns? As well as, what are the length and onset of the monsoon different for each region? And what is the major contributor to total annual precipitation? And these are the sites that were selected, and the method used was k-means clustering, and all the data was normalized so that there was no regional bias to the data. And what we can see is that these different colors, the black, the blue, the white, the yellow, the green, represent different regions of having different precipitation amounts and trends that are similar. For example, the high mountain areas like the Chiska Mountains, as well as Navajo Mountain in that region, they see similar precipitation trends. And, Eastern Navajo sees a lot of the same precipitation trends. One thing that is interesting is when you look at the northern portion, in black, you see that the precipitation trends are for the most part on the northern side of the Navajo Nation, whereas there is one area that has similarities. And if you've ever been to Bitter Springs and you compare that to Bluff and Denahoto, then you can see those similarities as well. And then the Western Navajo portion is in yellow. So just keep in mind that black is north, east is white, and blue is south, and yellow is west, and then the green is the high mountain areas. Here's the precipitation climatology, basically quantifying what we already know as Navajos living on the Navajo Nation. Oftentimes we know that June is the driest time, but we know when summer hits that the monsoon seasons begin. And the work that I did was to be able to evaluate that. So let's pay attention to the green line. That green line is the mountain areas, as you can remember, and the time that it sees peak precipitation is in the winter, and that is definitely the case for that mountain region, whereas the rest of the Navajo Nation sees peak precipitation occurring during the North American monsoon. On average, for the Navajo Nation is in the black dotted line, and you see that, for the most part, the majority of the Navajo Nation sees peak precipitation during August, and then second to that would be around February. And that case is definitely true with what we've seen this month, in fact, with the precipitation events of snow coming into our region. Now, further evaluating seasonal precipitation, the top graph is representing winter precipitation. The bottom graph is representing summer. The x-axis is water years, the y-axis is precipitation amount. And the colors again correlate to the different regions throughout the Navajo Nation. What we see on the top with winter precipitation is that the trend is fairly similar across the regions. And one might ask the question, why is that? And that's related to the large frontal storms that come across from the Pacific and move on eastward into the region of the Navajo Nation. And these are large frontal storms, so they cover a large area spatially, whereas we see summer precipitation doesn't have a lot of similarities and trends like what we see with winter precipitation. And these are small smaller storms that are convective, and sometimes we can see it raining in Loop, and then you just are across the community in Birch Springs, and you might not have that same precipitation event. Or same can be true on the eastern side of Navajo, being in Ojo and Sino, and then maybe in Counselor, you're not seeing that same precipitation. It's related to precipitation that is there. What you can also see from this graph is that there's more precipitation that has come throughout the years from winter precipitation as far as amount. And for summer precipitation, it's a little lower in precipitation amount. When we do a year-to-year comparison, again, x-axis is on the bottom, and then on the y-axis on the top graph, we have total annual precipitation. That means like the sum of the summer and winter precipitation together. And then we have on the bottom a ratio, a summer to total annual ratio. Let's go ahead and look at the top graph. So we can see that the high mountainous regions see the most precipitation throughout the years compared to all the other regions. And western side of Navajo as well as northern side of Navajo Nation sees the least amount of precipitation compared to all the other regions. When we go to the bottom graph, the 1 is representing if 100% of the precipitation were to contribute to the total annual precipitation, and then the 0 is representative of if 100% of the precipitation of total annual precipitation came from winter precipitation. And this goes to speak to a question of, when people make the phrase, we had a really wet summer, so that means we're going to have a wet winter. What this shows is that that's not true, that the summer and winter precipitation contributions to total annual precipitation are variable. For example, if we were to take the year 2005, that we see the most amount of precipitation compared to all the years evaluated, in that particular year, the majority of that precipitation was due to winter. But when we look at the year after 2006, that 2006 year, what we see is that the majority of that total annual precipitation was actually due to summer precipitation. The seasonal patterns compared with the climate indices, there's different climate indices out there, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which is the PDO. We also have the Nino 3.4, and then the Pacific North American, the PNA. And what this evaluates is just the correlation with climate indices, basically looking at winter precipitation and does it correlate with a particular climate index more so than another, and then the same for summer as well. The red is representative if there's weak correlation. The blue, the darker the blue, the more correlation there is with the climate indice. And what we see for winter is that, there's not a very strong correlation. A very strong correlation would be a 1, but they're out of all of the climate indices that are given there, the Pacific North American seems to be the one that is the most similar to winter precipitation. When we look at summer, those climate indices don't correlate well with summer precipitation. So in the end, the conclusions are, climatology on Navajo Nation varies depending on the region, that the length and the onset of the monsoon are different for each region, as well as summer and winter precipitation contributions to annual precipitation are variable. And extremes in winter and summer are independent of each other, and that winter precipitation is sensitive to PNA, the Pacific North American, and then that summer precipitation responds weakly to major climate modes. So what is this related to drought? On the Navajo Nation, we have a drought contingency plan that was our latest version is 2003. We are in the process of updating some of our documents that we have. Right now, we're working on the water development strategy document to update that. But there's also related work. This precipitation that we talked about really informs drought in the area and how the drought monitor could be able to be improved with the information that is spanned across the 27,000 square miles of the Navajo Nation. This is the drought monitor today, and what we see is that there's severe to exceptional drought witnessed across the Navajo Nation. This impacts a lot of things. It impacts the recharge to groundwater. It also impacts, the dune migration, as I've already previously stated. The plant population is impacted. The wildlife and livestock populations are definitely impacted. And Nikki will be presenting today to be able to also talk about the drought severity evaluation tool, of which the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources Water Management Branch has been working in collaboration with NASA to further evaluate drought on the Navajo Nation. I'll turn it over to Nikki now. Thank you.
My name is Nikki Tulley, and I am going to present this evening on the Drought Severity Evaluation Tool, a collaboration of sovereignty and science for the Navajo Nation. Our project team encompasses NASA, the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources, the Desert Research Institute, and myself from the University of Arizona. I'd like to just also highlight the DSET website link at which you could access the drought severity evaluation tool that I will be presenting to you this evening. Before we go any further, I'd like to share this video with you to give you an understanding of the overall emphasis and drive of this, the creation of this tool in providing you this introductory video.
Trochidon in Ado endetta Trollahate ego eia Nat los Ediki eia as dahat Nalt los betro Villa ashlai betro Endetta late natin sei betro as ego eia kondiki eia Badahana Nleda tro besto banana ahata joita eia tronta los in the dele eia konde ki eia tronat los ki eia tlesh behal kadeki da chita ado in the kwige eta hol beo da catch eat los edo da eia Han sogota eia tide nalt los patole winzego. Diki eia aquege han sogoshi eia datenslen da agil in leko. Akonde do jegon haltieno tide tronat loze abich na huntla. Kodan dat de yosh. Tlež da eia kode da trago da nas trandle. Ado indita beshil wadiki, troil wadiki, beshna batliki da adat e. E koda eia troha o ndaltsa do handelsogoshe troha ja atendl a. Diki eia ko trohagi johut ego sto. Ajigo sto ohut ego eia ahilt ego ibena hot ille.
Tuaeina, which can be translated into meaning water is life. The mentality of water is life is fundamental in sustaining the way of life for the Navajo Nation and for the Navajo people. The lifestyle of the Navajo people still heavily consists of agricultural practices, owning livestock, and hauling water. Due to frequent droughts, this lifestyle is impacted. The Navajo Nation is the largest Native American reservation in the United States. The reservation is approximately 27,000 square miles, an area that reaches into 3 states, which are New Mexico, Utah, and Arizona. Drought conditions influence the pattern of water availability found on the Navajo Nation, which can be linked to the domestic water supply, livestock, agriculture, and cultural and spiritual well-being. Two members of NASA's Applied Science program, Dr. Cindy Schmidt and Dr. Amber McCollum, learned more about the drought issues being experienced on the Navajo Nation. While on a visit to the reservation, they took the opportunity to meet with the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources personnel. As a result of this visit came the development of a 2-term internship project in 2015, which established the relationship and connection between NASA and the Navajo Nation. Dr. Schmidt and Dr. McCollum continue to help build other NASA relationships with the Navajo Nation. One such relationship resulted in the Develop Ames Navajo Nation Climate 1 and 2 teams. These teams created the Drought Severity Assessment Tool 2.0. Following the Develop project, NASA's Western Water Applications Office created the Drought Severity Evaluation Tool, otherwise known as DSET. DSET was co-developed with the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources, NASA's Western Water Applications Office, and the Desert Research Institute, as a spin-off of Climate Engine to create on-the-fly maps, time series, and much more. The co-development partnership relationship resulted in a partner-driven, user-friendly tool. The DSET development relationship engagement continued with Carl McClellan of the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources Water Management Branch and Dr. Amber McCollum of NASA's Western Water Applications Office, along with other personnel who took on the tool development to include the Navajo Nation rain gauge data, satellite data, model data sets, and drought and vegetation indices.
Tide do nahaltkendaiki, kuigi naskaiki, na beho bekea bekake, do and na etikitiki eya bikestita. Tide kuigi, be na initiato kweke na askaiki, chahot eya be na noltra neli do lel. Tide na alkahiki, tekit eya, di konde nanse, inde dale Biketes tieki, eteki eya saho, eteki nalka, nelito lel, dide do nahaltiendaiki, halet ela, ado inteta nanse elto, halet ao eya nanstala, ado inteta tadilieheki, alto biketes tieto lel, do konti nalklosh, Bekat nalte do chios iniki hut ego bena inishiki da holtaa beketes tieto. Tide kona inishiki bechahot aniki eya yetes kanko yedo biteto til ado indota nalkahiki edeki eya behos ani benache atodol nil na beho bekea beka getopa.
So I wanted to start off with sharing that video with you to give you an overall view of really the emphasis of the tool and what the tool is focused on accomplishing. And at the start of this presentation on the title slide, you might recognize this photo on the right-hand side being the Canyon de Chelly area. And on the left-hand side on your screen, you'll see the Cheska Mountain area. And as you can see the deep contrast of the two landscapes on the reservation, this is what the very different landscapes that could be monitored by DSET to create this picture of drought monitoring on Navajo. What DSET aims to do is to improve the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resource drought reporting through Earth observations and in situ data within a user-friendly web application. Again, with this anticipated impact to provide information necessary to make informed decisions on allocations of drought. What is also very important to this collaboration of co-developing DSET has been this connection to Navajo land and understanding that there's this pre-existing knowledge that exists within the Navajo Nation, which can stem from traditional ecological knowledge, community engagement, the place-based approaches, as well as the technical workshops that are there. And in understanding this pre-existing knowledge systems and communication mechanisms was really the drive to incorporate the video that was just shown to you, to understand that not only is there another language apart from English still heavily spoken on the Navajo Nation, but there is also this array of diversity of thought that could go into creating this drought severity evaluation tool. On the screen here, you see the web page to the Climate Engine. So what DSET is a spin-off of this popular Climate Engine website that you see here before you. What Climate Engine has done is harness the power of the cloud through the Google Earth engine, and is this way to apply the on-the-fly computing. And so Climate Engine has already been used for drought, agriculture, as well as wildlife monitoring. What DSET has done has, again, to share with you, has been co-developed with NASA's Western Water Applications Office, the Navajo Nation Division of Water Resources Water Management Branch, and the Desert Research Institute. And in this understanding of this collaboration, there has been this emphasis to really take notice to what Navajo's interests are in wanting to, what they desire to get out of DSET. And so there's been these 4 areas that have been identified in this tool development. That one, this DSET be a free web application, but it also be user-friendly and a way to be a time and storage saver. And also that the products from DSET would be a way to analyze and visualize the data to be made easier. This here is to show you how this combination of data comes together. As Crystal mentioned in her presentation prior to this, there's this Navajo rain gauge data that has been collected over the years that has been incorporated into the drought severity evaluation tool to be coupled with the satellite data and also the model data sets that you see here. And with these 3 data sets coming together, this is where you can find the ways to enter your variables here with the drought severity evaluation tool. Some of the satellite data that you might be familiar with and which you'll find in DSET is Landsat, CHIRPS, and MODIS. So what are some of the DSET capabilities? Some of the DSET capabilities here is to really show you that there's this easy to use interface component to DSET. On the left-hand side of the screen, you see a display of the standardized precipitation index from using the CHIRPS database, and able to find the values broken down by region on the Navajo Nation. On the right-hand side, you're able to develop in DSET these on-the-fly maps and time series. Here on this particular slide, you see the NDVI values. So one question that you might ask when looking at DSET is, what are the rain gauge totals from the 2019 summer monsoons? Here on the slide, what you see is what you will find when you go into the DSET tool. On the left-hand side, you see this area where you can enter in the type of visualization layer you're interested in, as well as your variables, the processing, and even incorporate a specific time period that you are interested in looking at. What you see here on the screen is the precipitation rain gauge data areas of where you can find these values to really understand more about what the values are. So going back to this question, what are the rain gauge totals for the 2019 summer monsoon? You can go in and look to see the specific values exactly, and even down to the specific value for the rain gauges. Some other things that you might want to do, apart from looking at drought indices or precipitation indices, can go into an array of other topics. For example, here on the screen, what you see is a Navajo Times excerpt from 2014, in which the Sayat Lake fire is mentioned, which grew up to be about 1,000 acres. And so the Sayat Lake fire took place on one of the mountain ranges on Navajo. It was in the Cheska Mountains. So here, again, you see what DSET might look like when you go into the tool. But now what we're looking at here is we're interested in looking at the fire burn scars. And with this, we can use this indice of the BAI, which is the burned area index. So by using the MODIS data set, through using remote sensing, we're able to look at this burned area index. And based on the knowledge, the pre-existing knowledge of when the wildfire for the Asayat Lake fire occurred, we're able to tailor our time period to the specific time to look at the BAA values to identify the Asayat Lake fire. One of the capabilities of DSET is there's different layers that you can apply that have been specifically tailored to Navajo. For example, there's chapter boundaries, agency boundaries, and this here shows us the mountain boundaries that have been outlined on the Navajo Nation. So here on the screen, you see the Cheska Mountain boundary as outlined. Zooming in further, we're able to see this particular area where the Asayat Lake fire occurred. Now that was the map we showed you. Here is the time series that could be created for such an event. On the slide, what you see now is the mean BAI, which is the burned area index, as well as the NDVI, which is the normalized vegetation index. So by looking at these two values and comparing the data pre and post fire to the Asayat Lake fire, we're looking at the burn scars, but with the NDVI value coupled on this time series is able to show us the growth and the productivity of a vegetation through the NDVI value, which shows these vegetation in the area that come back. So looking specifically at this time series, what we see is the burned area index being to a lower value and the NDVI being to a higher value before the Asayat Lake fire. And then when the Asayat Lake fire occurred, we're able to see how those values drastically change, in which the BAI values grow to a higher level and the NDVI values drop. And after the post-fire monitoring through using the satellite data, the Earth observations, what we're able to see is a bit of that regrowth coming back with the years following the fire. Now that's just to give you a little sample about what DSET can do. But again, one of the large emphasis of this program in developing this co-developed tool is really to make this emphasis on the drought-driven tools that start with relationship. Again, working with the NNDWR, the DRI, and the NASA WAO office, that these coming together and the people really building the relationships was one of the emphasis. Here on the slide, what you see is a couple of trainings that took place in Winter Rock and Flagstaff, Arizona, with different personnel from the tribal entities on Navajo, where there was this training, but also a feedback and discussion session that has occurred. Now, the work and the collaboration and the relationship building has not stopped with DSET. So DSET is up and running now. However, there are future projects and partnerships that are now underway to be developed. Again, building upon that DSET training that has been just shared with you briefly, there's now this Open ET project in which evapotranspiration is being looked at using satellite-based estimates of ET, evapotranspiration, for the improvement of water management. And so looking to build more of these partnerships again on Navajo, again with the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources, but also the Department of Agriculture and the NAPI product industries to be able to look at this and continuing to build these relationships with NASA and Earth observation data and ground data. Again, this is the team that has come together for the DSET project, and I'd like to draw your attention to the NASA DSET website link, where you can find more of these tutorial videos, the interactive user guide, as well as more information on the project. Thank you.
We'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Ernest, you should be able to unmute yourself.
The question I have is, how is this study going to integrate production that's actually on the ground? If you look at only the water, how much water is actually running off the surface because of overgrazing versus the production numbers that show less water loss through runoff. Is there any plans on doing that type of study or integrating it into this program?
Ernest, what program are you referring to?
What you're doing, the study that you're doing?
Yeah, so the area, so anybody can have access to the DSET tool that is already up, and so people can go in and tailor the variables that they're interested in. And so for grazing that you just mentioned, that type of variable might be to look at where there has been heavy drought impact, and then coupling that with where some of the precipitation has been lower in those areas, to where you might see some of the impact lands of the region of impact watersheds of how the vegetation might have changed. What we haven't looked at specifically is anything to really look specifically to grazing management, but more so looking at the drought aspect. And then now with this newer project, looking at evapotranspiration with more of the agriculture sector. But there are definitely ways in which variables could be tailored to the questions in a different kind of way in asking the question and using those variables that are pre-existing in the tool.
All right, thank you.
Question from Marjorie.
Okay, can you hear me? I have like two questions. Number one is, I know we're running livestock, we're producers, and we're always looking at how much rainfall we're going to be getting, or how much we got, or something like that, and what we're going to be expecting the next season, next year, or something like that. But we always resort to the National Drought Report or within the New Mexico. And it's usually like up to date, like maybe if I pull one out, it'll probably be dated like probably a week ago. Do you have any report that we can download from your website that we can utilize to verify that we are in a drought? And then number two, the Navajo Nation Water Resources does have a rain gauge, just like probably half a mile where I graze my cattle. Is there a way I can specifically look at that rain gauge, what the reports look like? That's right there in Crown Point at Pitts Ranch headquarters. I'm not sure. I kind of saw that little rain gauge when you were showing your slide. And then number three, the Navajo Nation always waits for chapter to declare a drought. We're not recognized though until the Navajo Nation declares a drought. Then it's declared, the declaration is declared for a drought. From your presentation is just exactly what it should have brought to the Navajo Nation. Like, let's say, okay, it's a drought. Do you guys provide that information to the Navajo Nation so they can declare a drought? I did read my research, and I was looking up a drought report. I don't see a most updated drought declaration for the Navajo Nation. So I believe I asked 4 questions. And thank you. Like I said, your presentation is so excellent. It just brings up a lot of things. Thank you so much.
I can go ahead and answer the first question, well, the latter questions that you had asked about drought declaration. So the drought declaration is still in place of what had been signed previously, and I can share a copy of that with Sadie and she can get it to you all. The drought declaration doesn't end until the president says that he ends it. He can reaffirm it, and he was in the process to reaffirm it, but unfortunately COVID hit. And as you may already be aware, so many other priorities related to COVID have prevented that sort of reaffirmation of drought declaration. But I know that there are states that have, put out their drought declaration as well. And maybe one of the reasons why you might be asking is there is, for natural disasters of which drought is considered, there are resources to be able to seek funding from various aspects. related to drought, but like you said, it's important to have that drought declaration. But just so that you know that drought declaration is still in standing, and it was in the process of reaffirmation, but that hasn't been conducted to this day. Nikki, do you want to answer her other questions related to downloading precipitation data?
Yeah. So in Marjorie and DSET, you can actually go to the website yourself and also look to the dates you're specifically interested in and enter the dates in. And also, for example, you mentioned a specific rain gauge that you're interested in learning more data about. You can actually go in and use that as a variable that you're interested in looking at, and look at that one rain gauge data set that you're interested in looking at the numbers, as well as how the drought is looking in the area based on the remote sensing Earth observations that are taken frequently on a regular basis, and able to create your own analysis that can be downloaded, and also in a map format, but also a time series format.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. And I think Crystal again placed the links in the chat to where you could access that webpage.
Or maybe email it to Sadie, and Sadie can email us.
Would anyone else like to ask a question? Wallace, go ahead.
My name is Wallace, associate with the Fort Defiance on the Soil and Water Conservation District. I don't know if you heard about conservation districts. It's an organization that's all over the United States, and Navajo has 5 conservation districts, and Fort Defiance is just one of them. And one of the concerns we always talk about is looking into the future. When with all these data and information, which the our lawmakers may become aware of one of these days, and start talking about how do we conserve water into the future of the Navajo Nation. I think that's one of the things that nobody really wants to talk about, because as the population grows and the drought that we're experiencing, and the amount of water on Navajo is declining, and how do we plan it into the future so that our children, our grandkids can have enough clean water to drink? I think this is an issue that we need to start talking about. Using the data that you got, that both of you presented here, is very good. So that's really my question. Does that mean we had the water code that we have, can we make that into a policy, and the land use planning, or the land watershed stuff? Can we start putting together a land use code or natural resource management code into the future, so that we don't run out of either water, or we don't destroy our land through the wind and rain, and that we maintain wildlife on Navajo, and that indigenous plants remain on Navajo? All of these natural elements needs to be included when we start talking about conservation of water into the future. Thank you.
I can speak to that a little bit. So when we think about water, there's, as I showed in that first picture, there's various aspects of water that we can be talking about. And perhaps, considering most of you are producers here, you may be referring to surface water. So that could be water that are flowing in the perennial streams or ephemeral streams, mainly like the washes or the streams that run year round. And it could also be talking about the natural lakes, and also maybe the impoundment that your livestock rely on. Also, that might also be related to groundwater. And when we think about those different aspects, yes, the water that is closer to the surface has been impacted by drought. There's short and long-term droughts that it has been impacted by. The best analogy that I can give for drought is that it's like a bank account. So if you were in the negative in a bank account, let's say $100, and each precipitation event was maybe 1 cent, 5 cents, depending on how much precipitation, rain or snow may fall with each event. It takes a while, if you're in a drought in the negative 100, with each precipitation event that might occur, And so when we think about that aspect, yes, there's limitations to the amount of precipitation that contributes to the surface water, as I've already described. But when we think about the water that we rely on for our drinking water purposes, those sources are finite, but the amount of water that is able to come out of the ground, is pretty good. Depending on where you are across the Navajo Nation, our well levels vary in size for where we're getting water from. In Black Mesa region, those are some of our deepest wells. They're not like a tank under each community. Instead, they're called aquifers, and the aquifers are throughout the whole regions in different areas. So it's important to be able to have that understanding as well, where our water comes from. It's not all Coconino aquifer. It's not all Navajo aquifer. If you're on eastern side, it could be from the San Andreas or Glorieta producing water. So it's important that when we think about water, we have a specific water body type that we're thinking about, because we don't want to just say conserve overall. It's important that we have a better understanding. And the reason I say that is when we think about our water rights, it's important for us to use our water rights. On the eastern side, you have the San Juan water rights that was settled. That's why through that settlement, the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project, as well as the Cutter Lateral, is bringing water into those communities. And these projects are really good for being able to sustain our water systems, because when you're in communities, they have water quality troubles, like on Eastern Navajo within the Rio San Jose Basin, like those communities in and around the Rue, like Smith Lake, Church Rock. You already know that abandoned uranium mines have impacted those water qualities. So when we think about being able to use San Juan River water to include that in our drinking water, those help us to be able to have a longer sustaining water supply. So it's important that, I know we always think we're naturally, as Navajos, we conserve water because many of us grew up in homes without running water. But when we think about the larger scale of things and think about all the people in the Colorado River Basin, we really want to use what water has been allocated to us through water rights.
Thank you, Crystal. Does anyone else have any other questions? Ernest, go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The question I have is, when you're talking water, you're talking potable water with the water line that's going along 491 and the Cutter Lateral. The problem is that the Navajo Nation is not developing or even starting to put storage tanks for the communities along that water route. And the only one that's really going to benefit is Gallup. Now you go to livestock water, the windmills that most people utilize are being depleted because there is no groundwater recharge. How can the study be changed to encourage or to monitor groundwater recharge? Because I know on the area that we graze, it's deep developments that we're using. So one seep is about 3/4 gallon per minute. The other one is probably only like 1/4 gallon per minute. So these are the water sources that we're having to deal with. So how do we get monitoring to start looking at water that livestock producers and those that would use it for irrigation? NAPI is not going to be completed as far as I know for 10 and 11. Even block 9 is questionable. So what do we do with all those water rights that aren't going to be utilized? Those are questions that are not being asked by the Navajo Nation. And that water and those water rights are not being utilized. I know that in Church Rock, the uranium and all that is an issue, but that's also going on along Ove and other areas where there were uranium mines. Is that something that this study can be used to monitor?
The studies that we talked about don't monitor groundwater. When you think about water development in general or operation and maintenance of the system you've just described, what does it take to be able to support those systems, whether it's development or operation and maintenance? It takes resources and funding resources. I mean, these are when we think about water development or operation and maintenance for these systems, we're in the $1 billion range when we think about the Navajo Nation as a whole. And you did bring up a point that, perhaps we're not using the water rights fast enough, but by a little beyond 2024, the Navajo Gallup water supply will be completed. There is a Crown Point lateral that goes onto Crown Point. So it's not just conveying water to Gallup, it's conveying water to Crown Point. We have plannings in place to be able to consider other communities that lines can be constructed to, but the limiting aspect are resources. And I'm one of the people within the Department of Water Resources that hustles for money. So what does that mean? I look for all these available monies that we could possibly apply for, whether it's through the state, the federal government. This pandemic has brought new people to the table, philanthropic organizations, as well as non-governmental organizations. And what I've been doing is to try to relay our needs for water. There's definitely, I know you described some of the lacking of water at maybe some livestock wells, and it'd be interesting to know if it's really related to being dried up, or is it more also related to not being operational. Those are aspects that we have to consider. When you think about the limited capacity that we have within our department, like what I'm doing, working on the Navajo Nation would be off the Navajo Nation, 7 people or 10 people would be doing what I'm trying to do. So it's important that we consider the limited capacity that we have, but also the funding. That's not just to give an excuse of why things are the way they are. With you all on the call today, you can be able to be the change you wish to see by being able to be the advocate for your own communities and the opportunities that are there through EQIP, through NRCS. You as different producers can be able to seek those opportunities available to you. And the more people we have to be able to solve our challenges on the Navajo Nation, the quicker we can be able to do things. So if the bigger team that we have to be able to do things, the more successful that we can be. But if we're just gonna sit back and rely on other people to do the job for us, then we're gonna not move as fast as we would like.
Okay, I appreciate the answer. The only other comment I have is that because the Navajo Nation codes hamper people actually working to improve or reduce and improve water conservation practices. I know for ours, EQIP requires you to have some type of control of the land. And as an open grazing permittee, that's not something that can be utilized. We're also missing out on a lot of conservation or conservation programs under NRCS and the FSA financial portion, because a lot of the people don't have control of the land. So I'm unique in that my wife has an RMU and we're putting in check dams, brush dams. We're looking at our water runoff. We sit at the headwaters. So what we do has a big impact downstream. Even the snow that we had, we've seen runoff in areas where we've put in some of these Excelsior rolls. We've seen water collect behind them now. And so these where you're not allowing people to build shallow catchments and claiming that it's waters of the Navajo Nation, that's counterproductive. The water recharge to the subsurface needs to be encouraged. And from what I see, we've looked at about 400 pounds an acre production on our RMU. That's pretty good compared to off open range areas where you're seeing probably 100 to 200 pounds an acre production, which means we're looking at about 40 acres for a single sheep unit. We're off In open range, you're talking about 400 acres for sheep unit. So these numbers are critical if we're going to keep the water on the reservation and on the land. So the Water Resource Department needs to start thinking what can be done to encourage people to do their own type of water harvesting, whether it's brushing rock dams, check dams, if it's going to be catchments, water spreading, all that needs to be something that is pushed out to where people can start saying, yes, I can do this. And it's being allowed by the Navajo Nation, because I've seen an experience where Water Resource and others come in and start hampering people trying to do improvements to keep the water on the land. So if you could just pass that up, maybe that would help us a lot as ranchers out here. Thank you.
Thanks, Ernest. As far as I know, Water Resources is not an enforcement agency, so we've not enforced anything related to water. I know EPA has enforcement with things that are permitting that is needed in areas that are waterways, but as of right now, according to the waters of the U.S., ephemeral streams are not currently considered a waterway. But I don't know if you're aware, Ernest, that through the Department of Agriculture, there is a conservation corps. And so doing exactly what you're describing, they're throughout all the agencies on the Navajo Nation. It's led by Ed Miles Harvey. So if you wanted to learn more about that, you can give him a call at Department of Ag in Window Rock.
We're familiar with that program, and because of COVID, they couldn't do much. And so we've been pretty busy on our own, and we're seeing results. I mean, the soil is starting to stay on the land. It's being collected behind those excelsior rolls and brush and rock dams and other things that we're implementing here. So, we're doing it on our own, and we're paying for ourselves. Need to be worked out as an incentive program for people to take these conservation practices and implement them on their areas.
Well, good job, Ernest. Keep up the good work. Ahwajit Ego is definitely a part of our Navajo lifestyle, so it seems like you're doing just that in the community.
Marjorie has her hand raised.
Okay, go ahead, Marjorie.
Okay, hi, this is Marge again. I have a question regarding the weather station. I sat in this meeting in Albuquerque with New Mexico cattle growers, and they requested for like $800,000 to install 130 weather station. And I think it's called Ziamet program or Ziamet program. And I noticed that we're already plotted out, like they were already proposing where all these weather station was going to be installed or constructed. I didn't see any on the reservation. And I just thought, I wonder if it's because that they're outside the reservation and we're in the reservation, that these weather stations were not considered for eastern area, although where we were in New Mexico. Are you aware of some of these weather stations that are in New Mexico?
There are.
Are we going to see one soon?
Well, some of the limitations with having automated weather stations is energy capacity. The energy capacity adds a larger price tag to operation and maintenance of that type of system. And so many of you know, across the Navajo Nation, we have in some areas limitations to broadband as well. So it's not just like limited capacity for being able to have energy to run these systems, but it could also be related to having the capacity of having broadband or satellite to be able to attach these to the weather stations. And the Navajo Nation is over 27,000 square miles. And that's a large amount to be able to put these weather stations up to have people operate and maintain these systems, especially when it takes the capacity of being able to have programmers that are familiar with this and having that aspect within our department, we have limited capacity, and that's the reason why even with just the 85 rain gauges, checking them monthly, that's been a limitation for our team in particular.
Okay, I was just wondering why we were not considered. So maybe that was one of the reasons why most of the 130 weather stations were being thought of outside within New Mexico, but not in the Navajo Nation area. Thank you. And just for information, I do have a rain gauge installed in our ranch and in our local area, in our home. And my children are doing the same thing. We do check our rainfall, and we never hit 2 inches. We barely did 1 inch, and most of the time it's like 0.30. So we're pretty much monitoring it. So thank you, but a lot of information you brought up is so excellent. Thank you. Unmute me.
Marjorie, this is Dave. I just typed in the message in there about we're working on a House and Senate bill to get more weather stations, but it's only in New Mexico since legislature is only focusing on New Mexico. So unfortunately, that's the case. But I hopefully we'll get funded, and these will be automated stations. So if it works out, then I'll be working with the Navajo Nation to find locations for these.
This is Ernest. Can I make a comment on that?
Go ahead, Ernest.
I think the chapters should bear the burden on some of this. I know not all 110 chapters can do it, but I think a good portion, maybe 80% of them can. And from what I've seen in the carryovers that they do every year, if you can get the rain gauges, then they can plug them in and they can be tied into their network systems. Some of it may be slow, but the data still can be downloaded. The other part of it is that this broadband initiative that the tribe is working on needs to not only consider how that data is being collected, but to also look at the benefits for students that are working online. And I think I have not seen anything in as far as documents as to how they intend to do the authentication, how they intend to do the backhauls, any of that stuff. So I'm just curious about if there's any direction from the leadership to begin collecting this rain data, because look at what Department of Agriculture got this last check for is 21 million, and it would be nice if the individual ranchers could qualify for that insurance too. So if there's funding that's available, I think chapters should do it, and that should come from leadership. Okay, thank you.
Well, let's go ahead and unmute yourself.
Anyway, have these weather stations at high school campuses throughout the Navajo Nation, where the kids can learn and even monitor them as part of their curriculum and learn about it, because this is going to be their world into the future. They're going to have to start learning about these climate changes and weather patterns that we're experiencing. And I think it's part of their education, and let them make these recommendations to the tribe and go from there. I think we never give our kids an opportunity when we talk about a lot of these issues, especially natural resource management on Navajo. Thank you.
So those that are still on the online with us, the Native American Producer Success Project had a webinar last week in regards to kokoras, And what we would like to do is those who want to purchase their monitoring for rain gauges, to monitor rain gauges, we are willing to assist you by helping you to set it up, help you to get online and get familiar with the app and be able to do daily monitoring. So just want to put that out there for you. So thank you very much, Crystal and Nikki, for presenting today.
Thank you for the invitation.
We'll go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you for those who participated in the poll. This concludes our 6-part drought webinar series. Do contact us with comments or suggestions for future webinar topics. You can like and follow us on Facebook, where we post information about upcoming events, monthly newsletters, how-to videos. We also provide USDA resources and links. As indicated at the beginning of our presentation, these webinars are recorded, so they will be posted on NAP's Facebook and YouTube, including the Southwest Climate Hub's website and YouTube. So that will conclude our meeting. I appreciate you all for being here. Wear your mask, social distancing, and just be safe out there. Have a good night. Thank you.